To uncover Death Note's underlying thesis, we need look no further than the title of the very first chapter, Boredom. Unlike in a lot of other shonen, and despite what Light may tell himself, the catalyst for the events of Death Note has nothing to do with destiny or cosmic alignment or even a chosen one. Instead, everything in the story happens because of a totally arbitrary, insignificant event. Ryuk is bored. More specifically, Ryuk is bored of spending empty, endless days in the Shinigami realm and drops a death note in the human world for some idle entertainment. Now, usually when you think of a godly realm or an afterlife, you might imagine something like heaven and hell. Most religions contrast these divine realms with the real world. While the real world is messy and imperfect, heaven and hell represent absolute ideals of good and evil, places where divine justice is carried out. Life on Earth isn't fair. Evil people get away with their sins, and good people suffer when they don't deserve it. Once they enter the afterlife, though, everything will be put in order. The good are rewarded and the evil punished. Justice and meaning are restored. Heaven and hell are supposed to make sense. But the Shinigami realm isn't like that at all. Instead of embodying justice or meaning, the Shinigami world is a dump. There's no order, no value, no purpose. The Shinigami have nothing to do but gamble and waste away all day. They write human names in their death notes at random to extend their own lifespans, which they continue to do even though they know there's nothing worth living for, simply because even they fear death. And this is the universe in which Death Note takes place. A world whose divine realm is just as, if not more, hopeless than our own. A world whose gods are, ironically, overcome with nihilism. It's less of a world than a void. This is the underlying ontological framework for the story of Death Note, and it gives us a clue into how we might want to think about the events of the series. When Light happens to pick up the notebook that Ryuk drops, it's nothing more than a mere accident. It's Light who imposes his own assumptions onto this occurrence, interpreting it as a sign that he was chosen by God to carry out a mission. But we, as the audience, know there is no cosmic significance to this event, it's just pure coincidence. Light becomes Kira because it gives him purpose in what he deems a cruel and rotten world. By convincing himself that he was chosen to be Kira for a reason, he copes with, or rather denies, the otherwise incomprehensible apathy of the universe. But it's also established from the beginning that he isn't pursuing this path out of a genuine desire for justice, whatever that means, but because he wants to become god of a new world. This belief that he'll become a god makes him feel in control of his reality, rather than feeling like just another helpless, insignificant blip in the universe. Just as Ryuk chases frivolous entertainment as a temporary escape from meaninglessness, Light chases after some semblance of purpose to justify his existence. When Ryuk asks him why he started writing in the Death Note, Light responds, "I was bored too." L's motivations stem from the same impulse to fill the void in his existence, but unlike Light, L doesn't deceive himself with delusions about his place in the world. L is a detective not because he wants to enact justice or fulfill some other lofty ideology, but because, well, it's what he's good at and obsessed with doing. He's extremely selective about the cases he takes on and only chooses the ones he's personally interested in. His motive, then, isn't to solve all the world's problems, but to unravel complex, high-stakes cases that he can take pleasure in solving, the Kira case being the most difficult and intensive of all. In other words, solving cases provides L with a source of thrill in an otherwise bleak existence. L treats life like a game, just as Ryuk treats life like reality TV. In Death Note, the character who's most purely motivated to enact quote-unquote justice is Soichiro. His definition of justice is synonymous with the law, and he spends his life fighting for this principle with the resolve that L admires and even mafia ringleader Mello respects. Soichiro ends up martyred for his beliefs, a sacrifice which, while tragic, seems heroic at first glance. But in reality, his death is completely pointless. Soichiro dies believing he's given himself to a noble cause, that he's gotten the police closer to finding Kira. But in actuality, Kira, his son, has been right there all along. Though Soichiro's pursuit of justice is admirable, what his death ultimately shows is that his worldview fails. In fact, none of the deaths in Death Note end up being worth anything. Soichiro sacrifices himself for a lie, L dies without having solved his case, and Light dies after not completing his goal. Their deaths aren't honorable or profound, they only die because someone else outsmarted or outprepared them. Unlike heroes' journey-following narratives where good wins and evil loses, In Death Note, the advantage simply goes to whoever has more luck or resources. While some might argue that Light's final defeat is proof that his evil acts were punished in the end, Light doesn't lose because he's evil. He loses because Mikami makes a mistake, and Nier happens to catch it. Tsugumi Ohba, Death Note's author, stated that he didn't want Light to fail, quote, because of his own mistake. I had to think extremely hard for a plot that relieved Light of most of the blame for his own failure. Hence, we had Mikami make the fatal error. Light doesn't lose because his evil ways clouded his intelligence and led to his downfall or anything like that. The story isn't trying to prove to us that evil is wrong or that morality is even relevant to what happens. Light loses because of an unlucky, random incident that he had no control over. Likewise, L doesn't die because of anything to do with his character or ethics, he dies because he just didn't know enough about the shinigami. Light's death renders his time as Kira more or less pointless, as we learn that the world basically reverts back to normal just a few years after he's gone. Contrary to what he imagined, Kira's actions don't have much of a lasting effect in the grand scheme of things. Nobody's does. The heart of all of this is Mu, Death Note's answer to the question of where humans go when they die. It gets translated into English as nothingness, but its original meaning signifies that the premises of the question itself are invalid. It's absurd to even ask where humans go when they die because there's nowhere to go. Humans can pontificate about justice all they want, but the only real justice is the totally equalizing force of Mu. In other words, the only real justice is death. In the end, it doesn't matter what we do with our lives, we all share the same fate. And that is the only truth that Death Note concretely supports. All other versions of truth or justice or ethics are socially constructed. Death Note doesn't contrive itself to have some grandiose moral message. It starts out as a game of wits, and it ends as a game of wits. Let's talk about the final battle. During the warehouse scene, there are 3 people who have a meltdown. Meltdown number 1, Light. Obviously, he's horrified and in shock that what he thought was his God-given destiny is crumbling before his eyes. Forced to cope with his shattered reality, he breaks down in the face of the truth, that he never was a chosen one, and that the world never really cared much about him after all. Meltdown number 2, Mikami. Like Light, Mikami believed until now that he was chosen by God, and like Light, he feels utterly betrayed when he realizes what he imagined to be God never existed in the first place, as his God literally gets wrecked before his eyes. He loses all sense of purpose and destroys himself. Meltdown number 3, Matsuda. Matsuda is the everyman of the show. He doesn't agree with Kira's ideology, but he also isn't completely against it, speaking up when no one else would on how Kira lowered crime rates around the world. Matsuda believes in justice, and he wholeheartedly believes in Light. So it's the ultimate betrayal when he realizes Light was Kira all along, and these last 6 years were all a complete waste. His prior outlook on the world in pieces, Matsuda loses his mind and shoots Light. He beseeches him, what was it all for? The answer, nothing. It was all for nothing. It is Matsuda who finally realizes Death Note's actual underlying message, that everything the characters do is only a coping mechanism to create meaning out of an inherently meaningless existence. Light's whole campaign ends up fruitless, Light's father dies for nothing, L dies for nothing, the whole investigation is for nothing because the culprit has been among their ranks the whole time. You can't even call it unjust because justice doesn't exist in the first place. It's like saying a rock is dead when it was never alive to begin with. Ironically, Matsuda's indignation in response to this absence of justice causes him to be the one who enacts quote-unquote justice on Light by punishing him for his actions. Matsuda's attack on Light is less motivated by an ideological drive to eliminate Kira, and more just pure unadulterated anger in realizing that all this bullshit about justice was a lie all along. While Nier is the one who gets Kira to the warehouse, it's Matsuda who initiates his painful demise. Nier doesn't have much of a stake in ideals like justice. He's just continuing the work that L left him to do, and he tells Light just as much. But Matsuda does have a stake. It's what he strived for his whole life, and seeing it all break apart in front of him prompts this emotional final reaction to end Light. And then, as if to underscore Matsuda's enlightenment, Ryuk finishes the job. Ryuk, the shinigami, the mascot of meaninglessness itself, driving the point home that in the end, not even Kira can escape the fact that the only real truth is death. So, would it be paradoxical to ask what the point of Death Note is, or if it even has one to begin with? Well, here's what Ohba has to say. When asked about his stance on justice, Ohba responded, "I did not put much deep thought into subjects like life and death or justice and evil. I wrote the story hoping that it would be good entertainment." Of course, there's a lot to be said about separating the art from the artist, but in this case, what Ohba says totally aligns with my engagement with the work. He wasn't trying to say anything deep about justice, he just wanted to write a good story. Just like Ryuk when he dropped the Death Note, like all the characters trying to cope with nihilistic dread, he was just trying to provide some good fun in an often terrifying and incomprehensible world. But while Ohba himself doesn't try to force ethical meaning into his work, the anime does have this tendency. For example, the infamous foot massage scene, absent from the manga, attempts to give Light and L's relationship a biblical significance, alluding to Jesus washing Judas's feet. The anime tries to make Ryuk's signature apple into a biblical symbol as well, especially in the openings, but the analogy doesn't really work. Is the apple supposed to represent Light's descent into darkness? But Light is the one giving apples to Ryuk, not the other way around. Well, according to Ohba, the reason he chose an apple was because he thought it was a cool fruit. Just as the characters project their false ideals of justice onto the world, the anime tries to force contrived meanings onto a story that rejects those labels. So, is all we're meant to take away from Death Note just the fact that everything is meaningless, and like the shinigami, we should just never do anything ever? This is what Ohba says. Question: were there any ideas that you specifically wanted to express through this project? Answer: no, there was nothing that I strongly wished to express. The basic underlying idea was that humans are not immortals, and once they are dead, they do not come back alive again. This is to indirectly say that we should all treasure the present and live our lives to the fullest. It's up to us to make the most out of the life we have. If Death Note wants to tell us anything, it's not that we should strive to be God or waste away or give in to hedonism, but to simply exist, and to treasure just that.
結構長い間、互いの退屈しのぎになったじゃないか。いろいろ面白かったぜ。